Hi guys, tonight we begin in a world covered in white silence. You are standing in a landscape where the air bites, the stars seem brittle, and the snow stretches farther than you can imagine. Your breath comes out like smoke from a tiny chimney, and the ground crunches with each slow step. The world feels endless, but also intimate, as if the snow itself is listening. You probably would not survive this first night if left alone, wrapped in only your modern jacket and optimism. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, and let's wander into the flickering glow of a world built for endurance and grace. The wind moans like a low flute as you walk toward a distant orange shimmer. Someone has built a fire, and its heat hits your face like a memory. The firelight reveals the outline of a shelter, rounded, low, breathing smoke from a hole in its crown. Inside, voices murmur softly, the kind of talk that fills the space between chores and sleep. You push aside a hide flap and step into history. The first thing you notice is warmth that feels alive, not mechanical. It breathes. It carries the scent of earth and pine resin, of fur and baked clay. You realize this is more than just protection. It is technology shaped by patience and intuition. Native peoples across North America, from the Arctic tundra to the desert plateau, all solved the same ancient problem: how to keep body and spirit warm when winter came to test them. The irony is almost funny. Today, you turn a thermostat and think of comfort as a button. Back then, comfort was built layer by layer, pole by pole. Every decision mattered: where to pitch camp, how to face the entrance, how to balance the smoke hole with the wind. Each shelter was a compromise between heat, airflow, and the sacred sense of direction. Fire crackles in the center of the room. A grandmother hums, stirring something thick and fragrant in a pot hung above glowing coals. Shadows of others, children wrapped in fur, hunters drying moccasins, flicker along the walls. You can almost feel the rhythm of centuries in that space. The same movement repeated every winter, patching bark, tying hides, feeding embers. You crouch near the flames, letting the heat seep into your bones. The structure around you is simple yet brilliant. Wooden poles lean toward one another like clasped fingers, their tips meeting at the top. The outside is layered with buffalo hides, stitched so precisely that no snow or wind can creep through. Beneath your feet, woven mats keep you from touching frozen soil. It feels snug, even delicate, but you realize that this small dome can defy blizzards that would flatten a careless traveler. Here's a fact that surprises you. Many of these winter dwellings maintained indoor temperatures above freezing, even when outside dropped to 40 below. They weren't primitive huts. They were finely tuned systems of air control and insulation. Archaeologists have found remnants of packed earth walls so dense they functioned like early thermal batteries, absorbing heat by day and releasing it at night. It is humbling to know that people achieved this balance without measuring devices or blueprints, just observation, testing, and stories handed down. There's a fringe theory, one that anthropologists debate quietly, that certain tribes arranged their shelters according to cosmic patterns, aligning doorways with solstice sunrise or lunar paths to harmonize energy flow. It sounds mystical, but you can imagine it, waking each morning to the same celestial rhythm, feeling part of something larger than survival. Historians still argue whether these alignments were spiritual, practical, or both. Some suggest that facing east helped capture the first warmth of daylight. Others think it marked renewal, the symbolic rebirth of each cold morning. Either way, the precision is striking. Even a few degrees off, and the wind could slip inside like a ghost. The air grows thicker with smoke, sweetened by cedar. You stretch out a hand, feeling the delicate draft from the smoke hole pulling upward. It's a natural ventilation system designed centuries before modern chimneys. You imagine nights spent maintaining that perfect balance, enough airflow to keep breathing easy, but not enough to lose the precious heat. Someone nearby adjusts a hide, and a faint gust brushes your cheek. The warmth dips, then recovers. You realize how alive this structure is. It reacts, breathes, and communicates with its makers. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Each flake lands softly, muffling the world in silence. The fire hums its steady rhythm. You think about how every winter must have been both enemy and teacher. People learned from frostbite and collapse, from the color of the sky and the bend of smoke. They became engineers of endurance. The most remarkable thing, perhaps, is how beauty never disappeared from necessity. Even in the harshest months, the shelters were adorned, painted hides, carved doorposts, woven mats dyed with berry juice. Warmth was not just physical, it was cultural, emotional, communal. When everything froze outside, people wrapped stories around themselves just as tightly as their furs. You glance up. Through the smoke hole, you see a slice of cold stars. They blink like slow heartbeats, steady, eternal. You picture generations before you, sitting exactly here, breathing this same air, tracing constellations through the same small window in the ceiling. You shift closer to the fire. The rhythm of the crackling wood slows your thoughts. You can feel sleep pressing at the edges of your awareness. It's easy to imagine how these nights must have sounded a lullaby of sparks, distant wind, and the soft snores of a dozen relatives nearby. But stay awake a moment longer. You've only just begun this journey. Ahead lie lodges built half in earth, domes sealed in bark, and shelters carved from the snow itself. Each one answers the same question in a different voice. How do you build warmth where warmth shouldn't exist? As you drift in thought, someone tosses another log on the fire, and sparks swirl upward like tiny stars, chasing the ones above. For an instant, the whole world past and present glows. Outside, the storm gathers. Inside, humanity endures, wrapped in skill, ritual, and stubborn hope. The fire dims, leaving trails of red light that dance across your eyelids. Outside, the wind changes direction, and you feel the entire shelter shift its sighing breath. You step into the morning snow, and the cold bites through every layer. It makes you understand instantly why knowing the seasons was not optional. It was life or death. The people who built these shelters did not wait for winter to arrive before thinking of warmth. They read the year like a story, and prepared for the next chapter long before the page turned. You begin to sense that time itself guided construction. The sun's path, the migration of animals, even the color of the sky in late autumn told them what kind of home to build and where to place it. Every tribe had its rhythm, a kind of pulse that matched the earth's own heartbeat. The Lakota followed the bison and set up their tipis where the grass grew thickest. The Iroquois planned their longhouse repairs just before the first frost. The Inuit marked the shortening days and knew precisely when the snow would be right for carving into blocks. The year was not divided by months, but by movements of the world around them. You walk beside a frozen river. The ice hums faintly beneath your feet, like a drum under tension. The sound reminds you of ceremony. You imagine that same hum guiding migrations, calling families to gather. When people moved, they carried their homes in memory and muscle. You can almost hear the careful folding of hides, the soft rhythm of poles tied into bundles. There was poetry in the repetition. A mainstream fact sits quietly in the background of this life. Many native groups followed seasonal rounds, traveling between fixed summer and winter camps. These were not aimless wanderings, but precise migrations that balanced ecology and energy. They knew where trees grew straight for poles, where clay could be dug for insulation, and where animals moved for hunting. To survive the cold, you first had to understand the year's language. You look toward the horizon, where pale sunlight drips through the clouds. The air smells faintly of frozen sage. Someone once said the land itself was a calendar. Each tribe's year revolved around recurring places, as if the earth remembered them too. Somewhere nearby, a storyteller begins speaking. His voice is low, almost part of the wind. He says that the first shelters came from watching the world's own builders. Animals burrowed, birds wove, beavers packed mud. Humans merely refined the lessons. A quirky legend follows. Certain tribes told that foxes taught early people to dig half under the earth for warmth, and that the first lodge poles were gifts from the forest spirits who pitied cold children. You smile at the image of foxes as architects, clever and quick. Historians still argue whether such stories were symbolic or held practical origin truths. Maybe both. Oral tradition carried technical information coded in mythic form. Saying the fox taught you to dig was another way of saying, observe the animals, they know what works. As the wind picks up, snow drifts across the plains in slow waves. You imagine families moving with it, trailing herds, searching for just the right hollow or hill where the wind breaks cleanly. The sky might be silver, the ground solid white, but within these movements there is order. Each camp returns to places of memory. A certain bend in the river, where last year's fire pits still mark the soil. A grove where bark peeled easily. A ridge that faces morning light. You crouch and scoop a handful of snow, letting it melt in your palm. This water has travelled too, from clouds to rivers to veins. Everything moves in cycles, and shelters are part of that circle. When spring came, the people dismantled them, sometimes burning what could not be carried, ash mixed with soil, feeding new growth. Nothing wasted, nothing idle. In one settlement, you find markings cut into wood, small notches in sequence. They might be records of years, or perhaps measures of the seasons. Anthropologists suspect some tribes kept time through counting sticks or lunar stones, ensuring no one forgot when to begin gathering materials. It wasn't superstition, it was scheduling in its purest form. You close your eyes, picturing a meeting of elders around the last autumn fire. They discuss the signs, the colour of leaves, the flight of geese, the behaviour of wolves. Each observation adds to a communal decision: time to move, time to build. Imagine the calm authority of that process, the trust it required. No one guessed. They listened to experience. A peculiar image floats to mind. On the Great Plains, people said that when the wind began to sound like distant singing, it meant the cold moon was near. That sound was their signal to start preparing thicker hides, to gather pitch for sealing walls. You pause, listening to the wind now, half expecting to hear that eerie melody. It is easy to believe such omens when you live in a world tuned to nature's frequency. The snow crunches under your boots again as you walk. In the distance, you see another fire burning, a faint dot against the white. You imagine travellers moving toward it, knowing that warmth waits at the end of their migration. There's comfort in that shared direction. As you move closer, you begin to understand that these migrations were not just about temperature, they were social. Each gathering reconnected scattered families, reaffirmed trade, ceremony, and marriage. Building a winter shelter was as much about maintaining community as it was about keeping warm. In a sense, the architecture of the people mirrored the architecture of their relationships. When the first snow fell, everyone knew their role. Some cut poles, others cured hides. Children fetched bark and moss, while elders recited the stories that carried hidden blueprints. Dig deep, face east, leave a gap for the smoke, they might whisper, and each instruction was a thread in an inherited design. The historian in you notices something elegant. Every tribe's solution responded directly to the rhythm of its landscape. Plains typists breathed wind, woodland wigwams clung to forest insulation, Arctic igloos borrowed cold itself as protection. All different, yet all synchronized to one truth: the seasons decide the architecture. As twilight falls, you sit by another fire, this one beside a half-frozen stream. The light shivers across the water, and you realize that time is flowing too, slow but unstoppable. You imagine centuries of people repeating the same seasonal dance, guided not by calendars but by the intimate pulse of the earth. It feels timeless and deeply human. Snow begins to drift again, soft as feathers. The rhythm of the year continues, an endless circle, a song you can almost hum. The shelters you've yet to see are already waiting somewhere ahead, tucked into the folds of history like warm hands under fur blankets. The world around you begins to thaw, just slightly, enough for the scent of damp soil and resin to rise into the air. You crouch and touch the frozen ground, feeling the weight of centuries beneath your fingertips. It is here, in the smallest details of the earth, that warmth begins. The people who once called this land home did not go to markets or workshops for their building supplies. Everything they needed waited quietly underfoot or grew within arm's reach. You realize how deeply they must have known their environment to survive winters that could strip bark from trees. You move closer to a cluster of logs left behind from an old camp. Each one tells a story of purpose. They were not chosen at random. Builders searched for wood that flexed without breaking, bark that peeled easily, and fibers that resisted rot. Some tribes favored willow, others birch or cedar. Each had its reason. Cedar gave off a gentle aroma when burned, birch bark resisted water, and willow bent into curves perfect for domed frames. It is well documented that native builders understood the chemistry of materials long before the word existed. They soaked bark to make it pliable, layered grass mats for insulation, and used animal sinew as waterproof thread. As you walk through the forest, you notice how every sound echoes softly: the crunch of snow, the creak of trees, the quiet flutter of a distant bird. The forest is both resource and teacher. Some elders said that if you listened closely to the wind moving through branches, you could hear which trees wanted to be used and which should be left to grow. A lesser-known curiosity claims that builders would sometimes place offerings, tobacco, beads, or bits of food at the base of a tree before cutting it. They believed it showed respect to the spirit of the forest. Whether you call it religion, philosophy, or courtesy, the act itself shaped how people harvested, sparingly, deliberately, and with care. You pause near a half-frozen stream where cattails still poke through the ice. Their brown tips tremble in the breeze. These reeds were more than decoration. Dried and layered, they formed mats that trapped heat better than cloth. Families would weave them in late summer, knowing that by midwinter they would become precious barriers against cold drafts. The smell of dried reeds still lingers faintly in the air, a soft sweetness mixed with mud and memory. Archaeological evidence confirms that insulation was not limited to plants. Animal hides, fur, and even snow played their part. In some regions, people lined walls with moss packed between poles, creating natural padding that held in warmth. Others stretched tanned buffalo hide over wooden frames, the thick skin breathing just enough to let moisture escape without letting cold enter. You run your hand over the imagined texture of those hides rough outside, velvety within, and think how far this is from modern insulation, yet how similar in purpose. Experts remain divided on how early people first discovered the insulating properties of snow itself. It seems contradictory, using frozen water to create warmth. But snow, when compacted, traps air and blocks wind more efficiently than most materials. In the far north, the Inuit perfected this art, building walls from the very element that others fled. You can almost hear the satisfying crunch of snow blocks sliding into place, the hush that follows once the outside world is sealed away. A peculiar footnote to history mentions that some tribes in forested areas mixed clay with shredded bark to form a kind of natural plaster. When dried, it hardened like pottery, turning flimsy huts into sturdy shelters. The surface even reflected firelight, creating a soft glow at night. Imagine lying in such a home, the walls faintly shimmering with amber light, while wind howled beyond reach. You kneel by a pile of dried pine needles and realize how scent must have played a role too. Every material carried its own perfume. Cedar, earth, hide, smoke together, they created a signature warmth. A home was not only felt, but smelled. In the morning, you might wake to the musky aroma of cured leather and the faint sweetness of sap. It was comfort defined by fragrance. There's something humbling about this level of awareness. You look around and see resources everywhere. Each plant, each stone, each creature part of a vast system. Nothing was waste. Ash from fires became polish for hides. Bones became tools for scraping bark. Even leftover fibers from weaving mats were used as kindling. Sustainability was not a slogan but a rhythm of existence. People took only what they could replace and remembered to thank what they took. You sit back and watch the last light of day shimmer through the trees. Shadows stretch long and soft. You think of a builder centuries ago, crouched in this same position, testing bark between fingers, choosing the right piece of wood. It was science by touch and intuition. They may not have had written formulas, but they had repetition, generations of trial and correction. In one corner of your mind, a question flickers. Could modern builders learn something here? Passive heating, local materials, zero waste concepts that sound innovative now but were once everyday practice. The ancient shelters were not crude. They were perfectly matched to their climates. The forested north used bark and moss. The open plains used hides and poles. The desert relied on clay and stone. Geography dictated art, and art responded with grace. As the temperature drops again, you feel the importance of these materials more intensely. Every fiber, every twig, carried the potential for warmth. Without them, no design would matter. The builders knew this. They did not dominate nature. They collaborated with it. You can almost hear their quiet conversations, discussing which trees were ready, which fibers dried best in autumn air, which hides cured faster by smoke rather than Sunday. The forest begins to darken now, the last streaks of light sinking into violet. The air feels heavy, fragrant, alive. You take a final breath before moving on, and it smells of cedar smoke and damp earth, a reminder that warmth does not begin with fire, but with the ground beneath it. The snow has settled deeper now, muffling the world into quiet layers of white. You feel the difference immediately as you climb a low ridge overlooking an open plain. The wind rushes over it like a cold river, fierce and steady. You pull your fur-lined hood tighter and realize that, here, warmth depends on clever positioning as much as it does on materials. Shelter is not just something you build, it's something you place. You kneel at the crest of the hill and look down. In the distance lies a cluster of small mounds arranged in a circle, each one blending seamlessly with the land. You walk closer, crunching through the snow, and discover that these are the remnants of old lodges, long collapsed but still echoing design. You imagine how, centuries ago, builders studied the wind before lifting a single pole. They watched how snow drifted, how grass bent, how smoke from a test fire curved through the air. Only then did they decide where to settle. According to long-accepted records, many tribes treated the wind not as an enemy but as an element to bargain with. If you face it head-on, it strips heat away. If you ignore it, it sneaks in through gaps. But if you learn to guide it, the same wind can feed your fire, carry away smoke, and dry wet hides. You can almost picture a group of elders standing together, watching the horizon, reading invisible patterns as clearly as a map. A peculiar observation passed through generations claims that some tribes believed each wind had its own character. The north wind was stern but dependable. The west carried stories. The south whispered of warmth. Builders would often orient their homes away from the harshest current, but leave a narrow opening facing its gentler cousin. It sounds poetic, but it worked. The design allowed just enough air movement to keep fires burning evenly without smothering them. Researchers continue to puzzle over how precise these orientations could be. Archaeological maps of ancient lodges show consistent angles, often within a few degrees of each other, suggesting a deep environmental knowledge. Was it superstition? Was it early meteorology? The evidence leaves room for interpretation. What's clear is that wind, in the hands of these builders, became a tool rather than a threat. You step into the remains of one structure. Its circle of stones outlines where walls once stood, and a shallow pit marks where the hearth once glowed. The entrance faces slightly southeast, away from the bitterest gusts. Behind it, A slope rises like a natural barrier. This is more than luck, it's planning. The hill blocks wind, the hollow traps heat, and snow piling against the back adds extra insulation. You realize nature itself became part of the architecture. Most researchers agree that location was as important as design. Builders sought sheltered valleys, thick groves, and river bends where the air moved softly. Some tribes, like those in the Great Basin, dug into hillsides, using earth as a ready-made wall. Others built near water to access soft clay for sealing. Every site reflected a conversation with the landscape. You crouch low and feel the gentle air movement around your hands. Even without walls, the spot feels calmer here. It's like standing inside a pocket of stillness. You think of families huddled within such a space centuries ago, the outside howling while inside a single fire painted the walls in amber. An old traveller's tale insists that builders sometimes tested wind direction by releasing a handful of ash and watching how it swirled. The direction where the ash lingered longest became the favoured position for the hearth. You imagine that moment, a family watching the grey dust twist and settle, deciding where warmth would live. It's fascinating how everything connected. Wind direction dictated the entrance, which shaped the smoke flow, which influenced where people slept. The architecture wasn't random. It was a living formula written in experience. You can almost hear the soft voices deciding, here, where the wind curls gently. Here, where the smoke will rise cleanly. Here, where the dawn can find us. The more you look, the more you realize that every choice reduced labor later. A well-positioned lodge needed less firewood, stayed warmer longer, and resisted collapse under heavy snow. Efficiency was survival. Nothing about this world allowed for waste. Even today, builders marvel at how those old placements balance temperature and airflow without any instruments. It's a kind of engineering that humbles modern design. They understood pressure, convection, and aerodynamics intuitively, long before those terms existed. The placement of a single doorway could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the sounds of a long-ago winter night, wind sighing past the walls, the gentle draw of air through a smoke hole, the faint hiss of snowflakes melting near the fire. Everything working together, a symphony of balance. In a far corner of the plains, another story lingers. Some elders claimed the wind carried the voices of ancestors, guiding builders where to settle. When the air grew too still, they took it as a warning to move on. Whether you believe in spirits or science, the result was the same: harmony with the invisible. As twilight deepens, you watch the snow drift lazily into the old windbreaks. The shapes of the ancient lodges blur into shadows, yet their wisdom remains. You can feel it in the air itself, soft and deliberate, shaped by centuries of hands that knew how to listen to the land. You take a slow breath, and the world smells of pine, smoke, and cold air tamed by genius. The lesson is simple but profound. Warmth begins not just with fire or walls, but with the wisdom of where you choose to stand. The morning light feels pale and forgiving after the long blue night. You walk toward the edge of the plains until the land begins to dip and roll into soft hills. The snow is thinner here, and tufts of golden grass poke through, brittle and shining. Ahead you see a cluster of low mounds half buried in frost. They look like sleeping giants, but as you draw closer, you realize they are homes, earth lodges. Half under the soil, half above it, shaped like gentle domes that breathe warmth back into the air. You step into the nearest one. The doorway is small, and you have to bend to enter. Immediately the air changes. It is still cold, but not biting. The inside holds a steady, deep warmth that feels almost alive. Your breath no longer turns to crystals. You can smell smoke, damp clay, and something faintly sweet, maybe corn roasting over coals. In that dim light, you can see the ribs of the structure, thick logs arched toward the center, coated with woven brush and packed earth. The roof dips low, almost touching your head. It feels safe, like standing in the womb of the world. Archaeological evidence confirms that tribes like the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara built these semi-subterranean lodges across the northern plains. The design was brilliant in its simplicity. By sinking half the home into the ground, builders took advantage of the Earth's natural insulation. Soil absorbs and releases heat slowly, keeping interiors stable even when winter storms shrieked above. Some of these lodges could stay around 50 degrees Fahrenheit inside while the outside froze solid. An unusual account recorded by early explorers tells of how some families even kept small patches of green moss alive inside their lodges through the winter. They believed it kept the air fresh and carried luck. Whether that's true or just an outsider's misinterpretation, it paints a vivid picture, life persisting in miniature gardens beneath the frozen sky. Experts remain divided on when exactly this architectural form first appeared. Some argue it developed independently across regions. Others think it evolved from temporary pit houses used thousands of years earlier. The timeline blurs, but the concept endures. Wherever people faced the long winters of the plains, they turned to the earth for comfort. You walk around the center of the lodge, where the hearth sits in a shallow pit lined with stone. The fire crackles lazily, its smoke slipping upward through a hole at the roof's peak. Around the fire, sleeping platforms ring the walls, raised on wooden frames and covered in fur and woven mats. You sit on one, feeling the faint give of hides beneath you. The heat rises gently, pooling beneath the ceiling before escaping through the vent. It's a perfectly tuned balance of warmth and breath. It's well documented that earth lodges often lasted for decades. When families outgrew one, they would build a new one nearby, leaving the old to return to the soil. In that cycle, you sense a deep respect for impermanence. Nothing wasted, nothing permanent, everything returned. A rare archaeological find hints that some lodges had separate summer and winter entrances, two passageways, one used when winds blew soft, the other sealed tight when the cold came hard. You picture a family crawling through the narrow tunnel, brushing snow from their coats, greeted by the glow of fire and the laughter of children who'd been waiting inside. The entrance tunnel itself served another purpose. By forcing cold air to sink below the living space, it created a natural barrier. You can feel it even now as you stand near the opening. A chill clings to the lower air, while above it the warmth remains steady. This is science learned by experience, refined through endless winters. Anthropologists note that building one of these lodges was a communal act. It took weeks of labor, dozens of hands, and songs that marked the rhythm of work. Each stage was almost ceremonial. Men lifted the main beams, women wove grass mats, children gathered earth in baskets. The air would have been full of voices, laughter, and the steady thud of wooden tools. By the time snow fell, the whole village glowed at night, tiny domes of light scattered across the valley floor. You run your hand along the interior wall. The surface feels surprisingly smooth, cool to the touch but strong. It has survived centuries of pressure, wind, and time. It's humbling to think of the minds that understood all this without measurements or blueprints. They built by feel, by memory, and by trust in the land. A curious local tale claims that during harsh winters, people could tell which lodge was strongest by listening to its sounds. A well-built home sang softly in the wind, a low hum that promised safety. A poorly made one creaked sharply, warning its owners to mend it before night. The story may be poetic, but as you stand in the stillness, you swear you can hear that low hum, like the earth itself breathing. Some modern architects studying these lodges have noted their resemblance to eco-homes and energy-efficient designs. They call it thermal mass architecture today, but it's the same ancient logic. You can't help but smile at that thought, the wisdom of ancestors recycled under new terminology. As the fire settles into a slow rhythm, you imagine a winter evening long ago. Families gathered close, light flickering on their faces. Someone strums a drum, another hums an old song. Children fall asleep beside their mothers, while elders tell stories about stars that can only be seen on the coldest nights. Outside, The wind claws at the hills, but inside, the world is soft. You stand before leaving and glance toward the smoke hole. Through it, the stars are faint, blurred by heat waves. They shimmer like distant embers. You realize the same stars have been watching over these domes for 1,000 years. When you step back outside, the cold cuts deep again, but you no longer feel unwelcome. The earth has shared its warmth, and you carry a piece of it within you. These homes, humble and brilliant, remind you that safety doesn't have to defy nature, it can grow from it. The air grows sharper as you move farther north, where the horizon feels infinite and the wind sings without interruption. The plains give way to open stretches of white that never seem to end. Here, trees grow thin and short, and the land itself feels stripped down to its essentials. You find yourself standing before a tall, conical frame of poles, rising like fingers clasping toward the sky. Smoke curls lazily from its peak. This is the teepee, the great folding home of the plains people, perfected through centuries of invention and lived experience. You step closer, snow crunching underfoot, and watch how the hide covering trembles softly in the breeze. The shape looks simple, yet it contains astonishing precision. Most researchers agree that its geometry is both practical and poetic. The sloping sides cut the wind while drawing smoke upward in a clean column. The structure can be raised or dismantled within an hour. Mobility, warmth, and beauty all meet in this one design. Inside, the world changes again. The fire glows low at the center, sending ribbons of heat that rise in waves. The light flickers across the interior, turning each hide panel into a shifting canvas of gold and shadow. You can smell dried grass under the bedding, faint traces of sweet sage, and the lingering perfume of smoke rubbed into the walls for waterproofing. It feels alive, breathing gently with the rhythm of the fire. It's well documented that tippy poles were often made from lodgepole pine, chosen for its strength and straightness. Builders selected trees by sight, measuring with outstretched hands, trimming bark with stone axes polished smooth by years of use. The poles formed a tripod first, then others were added, each one tied with sinew at the apex, crossing with mathematical grace. The result was a frame that could flex with wind yet hold firm through storms. An unusual story from an early trader describes a time when a storm swept across the plains and flattened European tents, while nearby typists stood untouched. The trader wrote that he couldn't understand it until he felt the poles himself warm to the touch even in the cold, the structure distributing pressure so evenly it could shed the wind like flowing water. You imagine his surprise as he realized how much knowledge was hidden in that elegant cone. No consensus yet exists among specialists about the exact origins of the teepee's design. Some anthropologists suggest it evolved from earlier lean-to structures. Others believe it represents the gradual refinement of nomadic engineering, honed by following herds of bison across the grasslands. What no one disputes is how perfectly it matched the lifestyle of its makers. A tippy could move as swiftly as its owners, carried on travois pulled by dogs and later horses, ready to rise again wherever warmth and food called. You look up and notice the smoke flaps at the top, adjusted by two poles that extend through the hide. A simple tug changes the direction of airflow. It's a small act of control over an unpredictable world. The fire below dances in response, breathing more steadily. The people who lived here knew the subtle art of reading smoke. If it coiled too tightly, the flaps were opened wider. If the draft pulled too fast, they narrowed them again. It was not guesswork but habit, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. A lesser-known curiosity surrounds the symbolic side of this design. Some tribes painted the hides with motifs representing the sky, stars, and protective spirits. Each tippy was not only a home but a story. The circle of the base symbolized the earth, the poles reaching upward, the path to the heavens. At night, when the firelight shimmered across those painted surfaces, the walls seemed to move like living murals. You picture a cold night when the wind howls across the plains. Inside the teepee, the sound is softened, turned into a distant whisper. The air feels dense with warmth, the hides breathing slowly, expanding and contracting. Children sleep near the back where the heat collects. Elders sit closest to the vent where the air is fresh. Everything is balanced, every inch purposeful. Old travellers wrote that walking into a tipi felt like entering a different temperature zone. The hides overlapped in layers, each seam sealed with care. When snow piled around the lower edges, it acted as extra insulation. The fire's reflection glowed faintly through the skin, visible even from far away, a constellation of small suns dotting the winter landscape. A curious oral account recalls that the builders believed each pole carried its own spirit. Before raising the frame, they whispered short blessings, thanking the tree for standing once more to shelter the living. It was a quiet ritual, performed more from gratitude than fear. Even now, as you stand inside one, you sense the same reverence lingering in the air. You run your hand along a hide panel. It's soft but strong, stitched with care using sinew that gleams faintly in the firelight. The surface still smells faintly of smoke and tallow, the scent of long winters endured and overcome. You realize how portable warmth can be, how intelligence can travel folded and rolled, carried from season to season. As you leave, you glance back through the entrance flap. The tipi stands proud against the white horizon, a dark silhouette beneath the stars. It looks both ancient and modern at once, a shape so efficient that even centuries later, architects study its form for lessons in airflow and thermal control. The wind sweeps across the plain again, tugging at your hood, but this time you feel less exposed. You have seen what true adaptation looks like. Warmth here is not a luxury. It is a moving, breathing companion, and in the soft distance, another fire glows, calling you forward. You wake to the muted hiss of falling snow and the earthy scent of wet bark. The world outside has vanished into a white blur, but here inside the forest, the air feels sheltered. Trees crowd close together, their trunks dark against the pale ground. You follow a faint trail toward a low, rounded shape that rises like a sleeping animal. The structure looks organic, as if it grew straight from the soil. You brush snow from its roof and touch the rough, papery surface of birch bark. You have found a wigwam. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Even the wind seems to pause at its edge. You lift a flap and crawl through the small entrance. Inside, the light softens. A small fire glows in the center, smoke slipping through a hole at the top. The air smells of charred wood, pine needles and fir. The warmth gathers low and steady, wrapping around you like a heavy blanket. According to early explorer journals, wigwams were the primary winter shelters of many northeastern tribes such as the Ojibwe, Abenaki, and Wampanoag. Each family built one in autumn, using a circular frame of saplings bent into arches and tied with fibre. The frame was then covered in overlapping sheets of birch bark or mats woven from cattails and reeds. Rain and snow slid off easily, and the interior held heat remarkably well. A lesser-known curiosity from oral tradition describes how families sometimes layered moss between bark sheets for extra insulation. The moss wasn't just padding, it acted like natural foam, sealing every gap against the wind. Some elders even claimed that sleeping near the moss helped calm bad dreams because it smelled of living forests. Whether superstition or simple comfort, the result was a sweeter, softer home. Researchers continue to puzzle over how quickly these shelters could be built. Some historical accounts claim that an experienced family could raise one in a single day, others say 3. The process depended on season, material, and terrain, yet the consistency of design across hundreds of miles suggests knowledge shared through generations. Wigwams were never identical, yet they followed the same rhythm like variations on a familiar song. You sit cross-legged by the hearth. The walls shimmer faintly, each bark sheet reflecting a bit of firelight. Smoke drifts upward, finding its way through the small vent. You can hear a faint crackle as snow outside melts and slides down the rounded roof. The sound is rhythmic, soothing. You imagine lying here on a winter night, listening to that soft percussion while the wind outside plays its endless song. It's well documented that bark was chosen not only for insulation but for its spiritual qualities. Birch, in particular, was considered a tree of protection. Its white bark reflected light in the darkest months, and its oil resisted decay. Many tribes used birch for canoes, containers, and even art, but its greatest gift might have been the warmth it gave. In every panel of bark there was a story of resilience. A curious belief recorded by missionaries claimed that each wigwam had its own personality, shaped by how the bark was laid. Some families spoke of their homes as living beings that creaked when happy, or hissed when displeased. It might sound whimsical, yet you understand the feeling. Inside this space, the air seems aware of you, responding to your every movement. The historian in you notices another detail, the placement of the fire pit. It sits perfectly at the center, not too close to the entrance, not too near the sleeping area. The smoke hole above aligns with it like an invisible spine. The geometry is subtle but precise. Everything here follows balance: the circle of the walls, the even spacing of the poles, the symmetry between door and vent. It feels mathematical, though no one here needed numbers to find harmony. Some anthropologists argue that the circular form wasn't merely practical but philosophical. The circle symbolized life, the seasons, the path of the Sunday living inside one was a daily reminder of continuity. When you sit here, wrapped in warmth, you can feel that truth. The walls seem to close around you, not to trap, but to hold. A traveller's note from the 1600s mentions entering a wigwam so warm that snow on his boots melted instantly, even though outside it was below freezing. He wrote that he could not see how such thin walls could hold such comfort. The secret lay in layering. Each bark sheet overlapped the next, like shingles, with edges sealed by pine resin. The structure breathed slowly, keeping smoke moving while trapping heat. An unusual practice accompanied maintenance. After heavy storms, families brushed snow away with pine branches, not to prevent collapse but to ensure even weight distribution. Children turned it into a game, racing around the dome, laughing through their breath clouds. Work and play blurred naturally, as they often did in these communities. Experts remain divided on whether wigwams were used exclusively in winter or year-round. Some evidence suggests families built larger, oval versions for summer gatherings and smaller, tightly sealed ones for the cold months. Regardless, the design adapted fluidly to its environment. Flexibility was its genius. You glance at the wall nearest you, tracing the grain of the bark with your fingers. It feels papery yet strong, scarred with lines like veins. Each sheet once wrapped a tree trunk. Now it wraps a family's dreams. The connection between forest and home is literal. You imagine the smell of fresh bark being peeled in autumn, sap clinging to hands, children carrying bundles back to camp. The act of construction must have felt like conversation with the trees, borrowing warmth for the months ahead. It's difficult not to feel reverence for such simplicity. Outside, the snow slows. The storm is easing, leaving the forest silent again. You peek out through the doorway, and the light reflects off the bark, glowing faintly pink under the setting Sunday. It's easy to see how a whole village of these domes would look from a distance, small, rounded shapes glowing softly, like beads scattered across the forest floor. You step back into the shelter and take a final look around. The air hums faintly with heat, the fire sighs, and the roof creaks just a little. It does feel alive, in its own quiet way. The genius of the wigwam lies not only in its ability to protect, but in how naturally it seems to belong here. In this forest, it feels as if it grew, not as if it was built. The cold here is unlike anything you have felt before. It presses against your skin as if the air itself has weight. You are far to the north now, where the horizon is a clean line between snow and sky, and the light has that pale blue glow that only winter can make. Your breath freezes in your eyelashes as you trudge forward across the frozen expanse. Ahead, small mounds rise in the distance, glistening faintly under the low Sunday. They are houses of snow, not fantasy but fact, built by human hands with grace and accuracy. You are about to enter an Inuit igloo. The word igloo simply means house in Inuktitut, though outsiders came to use it only for these domes of snow. They are not the fragile sculptures you might imagine. They are architecture in pure form, light, geometry, and science meeting in silence. You approach one and kneel beside its entrance. The tunnel leading in is narrow, barely wide enough for you to crawl. Cold air sinks into that passage, trapped low to keep the living space above warmer. You pull yourself through, and suddenly, everything changes. Inside, the world is golden. The walls glow faintly from the fire's reflection, transforming snow into a living lantern. The air is still and almost balmy, hovering near freezing but feeling comfortable after the brutal wind outside. You take a deep breath, smelling nothing but clean air and faint oil from the stone lamp that flickers softly near the wall. It is well recorded by Arctic explorers that an igloo could keep its interior at 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the outside, even during storms. The builders achieved this without wood, without cloth, and without anything but frozen water. The secret lies in the way snow traps air within its crystalline structure, creating thousands of tiny pockets of insulation. Layer by layer, they built warmth from the very substance that threatened to kill them. A curious note from the 19th century describes how Inuit builders could judge perfect snow by its sound. When cut, it needed to make a clean, muffled thud, not a squeak. The wrong snow, too powdery or too icy, would crumble or conduct too much cold. The right kind became as reliable as stone. It took generations of listening to master that sound. Experts remain divided on how the exact method of construction evolved. Some suggest it developed independently among Arctic peoples as climate patterns shifted colder around 2,000 years ago. Others believe it emerged from earlier snow shelters used for hunting camps. Whatever the origin, the igloo reached near perfection by the time Europeans first saw it, and even they, armed with steel tools and thick wool, could not replicate its efficiency. You watch as an imaginary family inside the igloo goes about their evening. The father trims the wick of the quillick, a small lamp fueled by seal oil. The mother scrapes frozen meat with a stone blade, the rhythmic sound blending with the low hum of conversation. A child sits by the wall, tracing fingers along the smooth, curved surface, fascinated by how it catches the light. The room feels intimate, but not cramped. The air moves slowly through a small vent near the top, enough to keep the flame alive, but not enough to steal the warmth. Archaeological evidence confirms that these homes were often built in clusters, forming temporary villages across the tundra, each dome connected to others by tunnels, allowing families to visit without stepping into the storm. The architecture mirrored community, each family distinct but linked, each home both shelter and gathering place. One peculiar account from an early ethnographer tells of hunters shaping windows from thin sheets of lake ice. When placed in the dome, the frozen pane let in pale sunlight while sealing out the wind. You picture it now, that delicate layer gleaming like glass, turning the interior into a chamber of refracted light. Even the cold, it seems, was invited to participate in the design. No consensus exists among scholars about whether these dwellings were used solely in winter or also during spring migrations. Some evidence suggests that snow shelters stood beside skin tents, serving as temporary warmth during travel. The practicality of building one so quickly, often in less than 2 hours, made them indispensable to survival. Efficiency became a kind of art. You run your hand along the inner wall. It's smooth as polished marble. The builder cut each block in a spiral pattern, fitting them so precisely that no mortar was needed. When the last piece locked into place, the dome stood self-supporting, elegant as a seashell. The residual body heat of its occupants sealed the interior, melting a thin layer that froze again, strengthening the structure. Inside, the cold was conquered not by fighting it, but by using it. There's something hypnotic about this balance. The same material that freezes your lungs outside becomes, inside, a guardian of life. You realize that this mastery was not luck, it was intimacy with nature. People here learn to read snow the way others read stars. A lesser-known detail from Inuit oral tradition says that when storms raged hardest, families told stories in whispers so the wind would not feel challenged. They believed the storm was alive, listening, and loud voices might provoke it. That image lingers in your mind. Warmth inside, fury outside, and in between, the quiet murmur of human resilience. You close your eyes and imagine sleeping here. The lamp's glow pulses faintly, casting shadows that shift like breathing. The snow outside presses softly against the walls, sealing sound until all that remains is your own heartbeat. It's easy to understand why early explorers described the igloo as a chamber of peace. When you finally crawl back through the tunnel and stand outside again, the cold bites hard. The wind burns your face, yet your body carries a memory of that inner warmth. The igloo gleams behind you, small against the vast sky, a reminder that ingenuity can be gentler than defiance. You look once more across the frozen horizon, and for the first time, the landscape doesn't feel empty. It feels inhabited by intelligence, patience, and quiet courage. The snow whispers as you walk, and you realize that even silence here has stories to tell. You travel south again, following the faint promise of trees on the horizon. The endless white fades into scattered pines, then thicker forests, and soon you find yourself surrounded by the steady music of cracking branches beneath your boots. The cold is softer here, though the air still stings your cheeks. In the distance, you see plumes of smoke rising from square shapes between the trees. You are approaching a settlement where wood dominates the architecture. These are log cabins, yet not quite like the frontier ones you read about in school. Here, the craftsmanship carries a different signature, a blend of old tribal knowledge and new tools that arrived with outsiders. As you step closer, the smell of cedar and burning pitch fills the air. The walls of the nearest cabin gleam with fresh resin, each log fitted snugly into the next. The corners meet in interlocking joints so precise that not even wind could slip through. You touch the wood and feel its warmth, radiating gently from within. The builders of this place learned quickly to merge their ancestral skills with new materials, adapting without surrendering their roots. It is well supported by historical records that many forest tribes, such as the Haudenosaunee and the Mi'kmaq, began experimenting with heavier timber structures in the 17th and 18th centuries. The shift came gradually, influenced by trade, by necessity, and by the slow expansion of iron tools through contact. The people took what was useful and ignored what was not. They already understood how to keep a house warm. All they needed were sharper blades to shape what they already knew by heart. A curious account from a fur trader's diary tells of a native craftsman who built a small cabin in less than 2 days using nothing but a hatchet, a stone adze, and a good eye. The trader marveled that the cabin stayed warmer than his own, despite being smaller. The difference, he wrote, was in the seal. Birch bark filled the gaps between logs, packed tight with clay and moss. Even after a week of snowstorms, not a single draft reached the inside. Some architectural historians still debate whether these hybrid homes represented loss or innovation. The answer feels simpler as you stand here. They were adaptation. The new materials only widened the possibilities. The shape of the cabins remained rooted in old designs, low ceilings to trap heat, central fires for both cooking and warmth, entrances placed away from the prevailing wind. Even as axes replaced stone scrapers, the philosophy stayed the same. Build with the land, not against it. Inside one of the cabins, you find a long bench covered in furs. A kettle hangs above a square hearth built from river stones. The fire burns low but steady, sending faint light across the walls. The smell of sap and smoke mix pleasantly, thick and comforting. A grandmother's voice murmurs softly as she mends a hide garment, her needle glinting in the glow. Beside her, a young boy stacks wood in careful order, learning the small rituals of warmth. Most researchers agree that by the early 19th century, many native builders had perfected the art of insulating wood structures without nails. They used wedges of bark and clay instead, sealing even microscopic gaps. The result was not only warmth but silence. Inside these cabins you could sit through a blizzard and hear nothing but the crack of firewood and your own breathing. A lesser-known tradition from this era tells of how families used cedar shavings under the floorboards to release fragrance as they walked. Each step stirred a faint, sweet aroma that mixed with the smoke above. Warmth here was not just physical, it was sensory, an embrace made of scent and sound. You watch as the wind outside brushes the walls. The cabin doesn't tremble. It hums faintly, absorbing the impact. There is a kind of quiet power in this stillness, the way the walls hold their ground without strain. You realize that every plank carries the echo of forest rhythm. The trees that once stood shoulder to shoulder now stand again, reassembled into a living geometry of protection. Experts remain divided on how much European design truly influenced these later shelters. Some evidence suggests that the idea of stacked logs predated colonial contact in regions where longhouses already used similar horizontal framing. Perhaps the newcomers merely added iron tools to refine what already existed. What cannot be debated is that these cabins preserved the same spirit of cooperation that built the earth lodges and wigwams before them. Construction was always collective, a song sung through work. One old story from the Pacific Northwest describes how people blessed each new house by brushing its walls with cedar branches dipped in salt water. The act was both practical, cleansing away insects, and sacred, asking the forest to remember its strength. You picture that moment, the scent of salt and sap in the air, the quiet murmurs of gratitude. As evening deepens, you sit on the floor and press your palm against the logs again. They feel warm, even soothing. You imagine the builders measuring each beam by hand, testing balance and grain, the rhythm of axes echoing through snow-covered woods. The repetition must have felt like meditation. By the time the last beam fell into place, the structure was more than a house. It was a promise to survive the winter together. Outside, the snow has begun again, thick flakes tumbling through the dim light. Smoke drifts upward from the chimney, twisting into the night. You step out and look back at the glowing square of the window. Inside, shadows move slowly, unhurried, at peace. In that quiet, you realize that warmth is not just an invention. It is a relationship between wood and flame, between people and their landscape, between memory and endurance. These cabins, both old and new, prove that survival can be elegant, and that even the coldest night can be softened by human hands that listen to the wood. The snow has slowed to a drift, falling like soft ash on the silent forest. You walk deeper among the pines, following the faint scent of burning cedar. The smell is sweet, sharp, and oddly comforting, like something holy carried on the wind. As you draw closer, you hear a soft crackle and low voices chanting in rhythm. The sound is not quite song, and not quite speech. It is prayer. You have reached a place where heat and spirit are one and the same. In the center of a small clearing, a round lodge stands with a thin column of smoke rising through its top. The structure is made from cedar poles covered in bark and hides. Its low doorway faces the east, and the air around it glows faintly with amber light. Inside, you can just see the shadows of figures sitting close to a fire. They move slowly, rhythmically, as if in conversation with the flames. This is not merely a shelter, it is a living sanctuary where warmth is sacred. Most researchers agree that for many tribes, fire was more than a tool. It was a relative, a spirit with its own needs and moods. The people spoke to it, fed it, thanked it. Each spark had meaning. Lighting a fire at the start of winter was an act of renewal, a promise to endure. That same flame might burn through the cold months without ever being fully extinguished, passed from one hearth to the next when a new home was built. A lesser-known curiosity preserved in oral history tells that the scent of cedar smoke was said to cleanse the air of sorrow. Families burned cedar at the start of each storm, believing the rising smoke carried their words upward where ancestors could hear them. Whether or not you believe it, The smell truly feels medicinal, steadying your breath and quieting your thoughts. You inhale deeply, and for a moment, the cold inside your lungs seems to melt. You step through the entrance, bending low to enter. The air wraps around you immediately, dense with heat. The lodge is dim except for the flickering heart of the fire. Around it, people sit in silence, faces painted by shifting light. The smoke hole above allows a faint blue column to rise straight into the night. You sit quietly at the edge, letting the rhythm of crackling wood and steady breathing carry you into calm. Archaeological evidence confirms that cedar, pine, and juniper were not only used for structure, but also for their aromatic and preservative qualities. Burning them repelled insects, purified air, and helped hide the scent of humans from predators. In the coldest climates, people learned to use scent as part of survival. Every breath inside a warm shelter was carefully managed, every material chosen for a purpose. Some ethnographers continue to debate whether certain tribal smoke rituals developed primarily from spiritual belief or from practical observation of fire behavior. Perhaps the line between those worlds never existed. In the stillness of this lodge, it's easy to see how faith and function could fuse into one simple truth. Warmth is life, and life deserves reverence. A traveller's note from the 1700s described sitting in a similar lodge during a blizzard. He wrote that the smoke drifted through the roof hole like a thread of silk, perfectly steady, even as winds screamed outside. He noticed how the fire burned on low embers, not high flames, and that every few minutes someone stirred it gently, never letting it die nor letting it rage. The precision was astonishing. It was as if they were not tending a fire, but conversing with it. You study the fire now, watching how the cedar burns slowly, releasing curls of fragrant smoke that wrap the room in gold. The air feels soft on your skin, heavy with warmth and oil. The walls exhale faintly with each gust of wind outside. The people around you barely move, their stillness broken only by the small gestures of keeping the flame alive. It's well recorded in winter accounts that certain tribes treated the hearth as a communal altar. Food was cooked on its edge, stories were told beside it, and offerings of tobacco or herbs were placed in the embers. Children were taught that the fire listened, that it remembered, and that to spit or curse near it was deeply disrespectful. When you think about it, that belief carries a simple wisdom. When warmth is scarce, you treat it as sacred. A curious archaeological finding from the northwest plateau revealed fire pits lined with layers of crushed shell and clay. The mixture reflected heat back into the room and also gave off a faint shimmer when flames danced upon it. Imagine that glow tiny sparkles of light across the floor, making the dark night seem alive. Practical and beautiful, as so much of this culture's design was. Outside, the storm begins to howl again, yet inside, nothing stirs. The cedar crackles softly, each pop and hiss a small heartbeat. You close your eyes and listen. The rhythm feels ancient, steady, eternal. Heat here is not wasted. It circulates like breath, passed between bodies, between generations. Experts remain divided on whether the cedar smoke rituals originated with one tribe and spread outward or arose independently wherever winters were harsh. But standing here, enveloped in warmth that smells like the heart of a forest, such distinctions lose meaning. It feels as though every culture that ever faced the cold must have come to the same conclusion: warmth is holy, and fire is kin. Someone beside you hums quietly. The sound is almost inaudible, blending with the sigh of the fire. The melody seems endless, looping like wind through branches. For a long moment, you forget the storm outside entirely. The lodge feels suspended in its own time, glowing softly under the weight of snow. When you finally step back into the night, the wind brushes cedar scent across your face. Smoke rises through the roof hole, twisting like a ghost toward the stars. You turn to look once more at the lodge. Its light flickers, tender but unwavering, a reminder that every fire ever lit began with the same hope: to keep the darkness at bay. The morning light returns, dull and grey, with the kind of stillness that only comes after a long storm. You wake to find the forest glistening, every branch iced over like glass. The air is cold but clean, the kind that stings your nose before softening into calm. You stretch and notice the faint smell of smoke still clinging to your hair. Ahead, the remains of last night's fire glow faintly, coals breathing under a thin crust of ash. Beyond the clearing, you see shapes of bundled hides hanging from branches and thick mats of woven reeds rolled beside them. It reminds you that warmth does not live only in walls and fires. It also travels with you, layer by layer, wrapped around the body itself. You step closer to the drying hides. They are supple and heavy, fur curling thick at the edges. A woman kneels nearby, scraping one with a smooth stone. The sound is steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of work. She looks up briefly and nods before returning to her task. Around her, children sit on woven mats, rolling strips of bark and twisting cords from grass fibre. It is a workshop of warmth, and every motion has a purpose. Most researchers agree that the layering of furs, mats and fibres was a science of comfort developed through centuries of observation. Each material played its role. Buffalo hides, lined with soft fur, trapped radiant heat. Woven reeds and cattails breathed, preventing moisture from turning into frost. Mats of willow bark added structure, while inner blankets made of rabbit or beaver fur sealed everything together. A person sleeping inside such layers could remain warm through nights that froze water solid. An unusual note from a Jesuit missionary's diary tells of entering a winter lodge and finding that even the floor felt warm to the touch. Beneath it lay a foundation of dried grass and reeds several inches thick. When the family slept, their combined heat sank into the mats, which then returned the warmth slowly like a living stove. The missionary wrote that it felt like sleeping upon a hearth disguised as a bed. Experts remain divided on how intentionally thermal these designs were. Some believe the layering was purely practical, a byproduct of available materials. Others argue that the builders fully understood the physics of heat retention and moisture control. Whichever is true, the results speak clearly. These were not crude solutions, but sophisticated systems of insulation, perfected through daily experience rather than abstract theory. You kneel to feel the mats yourself. They are firm yet springy, their woven patterns tight but flexible. The reeds give off a faint, grassy scent that blends with smoke and snow. The combination is unexpectedly luxurious, soft under your hands but strong enough to last through a season. It makes sense that warmth, like architecture, could be portable, built not of wood or earth, but of fibres and patience. It is well documented that clothing and bedding served as an extension of shelter itself. Families lined their sleeping spaces with multiple layers, often reusing the same furs for travel cloaks by day. Some tribes along the Great Lakes even created double-layered sleeping bags of stitched hides, fur inward for warmth, smooth leather outward to block drafts. The efficiency would make any modern camper jealous. A curious oral story from the plains tells of women who would rub their children's furs with powdered roots before sleep, saying it kept nightmares away and softened the smell of smoke. Perhaps it was a form of herbal comfort, or perhaps it simply helped them sleep. You smile, imagining the tender ritual repeated across generations. Around you, the activity continues. Someone shakes a fur, sending a faint shimmer of frost into the air. Another person hangs a finished mat to dry near the fire. The scene feels both domestic and sacred, a balance between craft and care. Every stitch here is survival disguised as art. One anthropologist described this tradition as the architecture of touch. The phrase feels perfect. The same principles that shaped lodges and teepees also shaped how people wrapped their bodies. You can sense the continuity. The materials echo the landscape, hides from the plains, reeds from the marshes, bark from the forest. Nothing about warmth was separate from the environment that provided it. A lesser-known curiosity recorded in an old ethnographic sketch mentions that during deep winter, families often placed heated stones beneath bedding mats before sleep. The stones were wrapped in damp moss to release warmth slowly through the night. You picture it now, a primitive but elegant heating system that could rival modern ones for efficiency. The stones glowed faintly under layers of grass and hide, their warmth pulsing upward like a heartbeat through the floor. You sit back and watch the family at work. The sound of scraping hides blends with the whisper of wind through the trees. It's easy to forget the cold when surrounded by motion. These small acts of preparation form a quiet symphony of survival. The repetition is soothing, almost hypnotic. Anthropological studies suggest that these tasks were also communal rituals. Elders taught younger ones through stories woven into the rhythm of labor. "This mat keeps your dreams from freezing," they might say. Or, "This fur remembers the warmth of its life." Such phrases turned practicality into poetry, preserving knowledge through emotion as much as through skill. You close your eyes and imagine the sensory world of those winters. The feel of fur under fingertips, the sound of reeds brushing together, the smell of tallow lamps burning softly through the night. These layers of comfort weren't luxuries. They were shields built from gratitude and understanding. Outside, the snow begins again, but gently this time. The flakes fall in lazy spirals, melting as they touch the warm hides drying in the open air. You realize that warmth, in this context, isn't only a temperature, it's a texture, a rhythm, a smell. It's something created by hands that refuse to give up softness, even in a hard world. When you finally rise to leave, the woman looks up again. Her hands never stop working, but she smiles, a small, quiet acknowledgement between those who have felt the cold and those who have learned to answer it. You step away from the fire, carrying that warmth not on your skin but somewhere deeper, where memory itself stays alive through winter. The sky darkens again as twilight falls, but this time the world seems quieter, as if holding its breath. You descend into a valley lined with willows, their bare branches bending low under frost. At the center of the clearing lies an entrance so small and dark you might miss it if not for the faint trail of smoke winding upward. You kneel, brushing aside snow, and discover a tunnel leading into the ground. It feels like the mouth of the earth itself, waiting to swallow the cold. You crawl inside. The tunnel is narrow, forcing you to move slowly. The air grows warmer the deeper you go, though your hands still sting from the cold. After a few paces, the passage widens suddenly into a hidden chamber. The glow of a low fire paints the walls amber. The air is heavy with heat and the smell of damp clay. You realize you have entered an underground winter house, a shelter carved half below the surface and half above, a perfect compromise between human need and the patience of the soil. Archaeological surveys indicate that such pit houses were used across the plateau and coastal regions by tribes like the Nez Perce, the Modoc, and the Chinook. Builders dug several feet into the ground, creating a basin that naturally captured warmth. Over it they laid a roof of beams and brush, sealing it with earth and moss until the structure became part of the landscape. The entrance tunnel you crawled through was not a flaw but a feature, designed to trap cold air at floor level, while the upper space remained comfortable. Even the smallest fire could maintain heat for hours. An old legend from the Pacific Northwest says that these houses were born from the dream of a mole. In the story, animals debated who could build a home safe from winter's fury. The mole simply smiled and vanished underground, returning months later warm and rested. Since then, people have built as he did. Whether literal or symbolic, the tale fits perfectly. The wisdom of warmth sometimes means disappearing from the storm. Some modern researchers continue to debate the engineering sophistication of these homes. Were they planned using thermodynamic awareness or purely instinctive knowledge? The evidence points both ways. Post holes arranged in circles, layered insulation of reeds and earth, and adjustable smoke vents suggest intentional design. Yet it is hard to draw a line between intuition and science when both emerge from observation. You sit near the hearth, feeling the gentle heat radiate through the packed floor. The walls exhale warmth like living skin. Children play near the fire, their laughter echoing softly under the low roof. The tunnel entrance behind you hums faintly with cold air slipping past. But none of it reaches this heart of warmth. The design works perfectly. The heavy air stays trapped below, while the lighter, heated air swirls above where the people sit. A curious detail recorded in early ethnographic notes mentions that families sometimes stored heated stones near the walls to act as thermal batteries. The stones absorbed energy from the fire during the evening and released it overnight, keeping the temperature stable. You imagine their faint red glow in the darkness, the slow release of warmth into dreams. Most explorers who encountered these dwellings in the 18th century noted how invisible they were from afar. A snowdrift could cover an entire house, leaving only a thin line of smoke to betray its existence. Some called them earth burrows, yet their builders preferred to think of them as homes returned to the womb of the world, hidden, quiet, resilient. It's well documented that construction of these winter houses was communal. Whole villages worked together, each family responsible for part of the excavation and roofing. The first dig was often accompanied by song. The rhythm of shovels striking frozen soil was punctuated by voices chanting thanks to the earth for opening itself. There was reverence even in labor. You lean back and close your eyes. The fire's warmth spreads evenly, and the smell of clay grows stronger. It is a scent both ancient and clean. You realize that in this design, the land itself becomes insulation, shelter, and symbolism. It holds the body and the memory of everyone who ever sought refuge within it. A lesser-known curiosity from oral accounts claims that certain builders aligned their entrances to follow the path of moonlight on specific winter nights. When the moon reached its highest point, a pale beam would travel through the tunnel, illuminating the hearth like a blessing. It's a poetic detail, perhaps exaggerated, but you want to believe it. In this darkness, the image of silver light touching fire feels almost divine. As night deepens, the chamber glows softer, quieter. The sounds outside have vanished completely. You can no longer tell if the storm continues or if the world itself has gone still. The fire hums, the air stays warm, and the weight of the earth above feels protective rather than oppressive. It is the kind of safety that asks for no proof, the kind that humans have sought since the first spark of civilization. Experts remain divided on how long these underground houses could last. Some records describe them surviving decades before being abandoned. Others say they were temporary, rebuilt each winter. What no one disputes is their genius, a perfect partnership between human will and natural physics. You reach out to touch the wall. It feels solid yet alive, faintly pulsing with the memory of the day's warmth. The earth holds stories here of families who sang through storms, of fires that burned while blizzards raged, of children who grew up knowing that home was not something separate from the soil. You can almost hear them breathing with you, the generations who trusted the ground more than the sky. When you finally crawl back through the tunnel, the night air hits like a wave. The stars above glitter sharp and cold, but you no longer fear them. Behind you, the hidden chamber continues to glow beneath the snow, unseen yet alive. You stand there for a long moment, feeling the ground's faint warmth under your feet, and you understand the earth itself can be a hearth if you know how to listen. The next morning rises pale and silent, a mist curling through the valleys like slow-moving breath. You walk toward the faint sound of voices and the steady rhythm of tools tapping wood. Soon, the forest opens into a clearing, dotted with low, smoking lodges. A dozen people are gathered there, wrapped in furs, working around a great communal fire. The scene feels alive yet peaceful, each motion blending into a pattern of cooperation. Here, warmth is not just built from materials or design, it is sustained through people. You notice how everyone moves with purpose. One woman spreads fresh pine boughs along the floor, creating a green carpet that smells crisp and resinous. A man adds logs to the fire, careful not to choke the flame. Two children carry baskets of dried meat to a nearby rack, while an elder hums softly, tending a pot suspended above the coals. It feels choreographed, though no one gives orders. The rhythm flows naturally, like a song everyone already knows. According to long-accepted records from early explorers, many winter lodges were designed to house multiple families. The Iroquois longhouse, for instance, could stretch more than 100 feet, containing several hearths spaced evenly along its central aisle. Each fire served a cluster of families who shared food, stories, and responsibilities. The design wasn't just architectural, it mirrored social organization. The closer you sat to the center fire, the higher your role in caring for it. Even sleeping arrangements followed the gradient of heat. Elders and infants lay closest, while young adults took the cooler outer edges. A curious field note from a 19th century ethnographer describes how the nights inside such communal homes sounded like an orchestra of breathing. The fire would settle to embers, and dozens of quiet breaths would merge with the soft hiss of smoke escaping through roof vents. He wrote that it was as if the entire community inhaled and exhaled as one body. You can imagine that sound now peaceful, steady, a living rhythm that made the cold irrelevant. Some cultural historians still discuss whether the communal structure arose purely from environmental necessity or from a deeper philosophy of unity. It seems obvious that both are true. When every life depends on shared heat, warmth becomes a social contract. It teaches empathy in the simplest way possible. Your comfort depends on the care you give others. You settle near the fire as the elder begins to tell a story. His voice is slow and gravelly, shaped by years of smoke and laughter. He speaks about how the first people learned that even fire needs company. Left alone, he says, it sleeps too soon. But if you watch it together, it stays awake. His eyes shine in the firelight as he chuckles, and everyone nods as though hearing something both ancient and obvious. Anthropologists have noted that this communal warmth extended beyond mere proximity. Shared fires encouraged the exchange of news, the strengthening of kinship ties, and even the resolution of disputes. Many tribal councils met around hearths for precisely that reason. The heat, it was said, reminded everyone that anger cooled too quickly if not tended carefully. A lesser-known curiosity from the Great Plains tells of families who would bury embers from their hearth when leaving for the spring hunt, then return months later to unearth them, believing that carrying the same fire into the next season preserved harmony. Modern science might call it symbolism, but standing here, you sense its deeper logic. Fire was family. To keep it alive was to keep the memory of each other alive too. It's well documented that food and warmth worked hand in hand. The communal hearth doubled as kitchen and furnace. The steady cooking of meat and corn added moisture to the air, preventing dry throats and cracked skin during the long freezes. Some explorers noted how the aroma itself seemed to comfort, weaving nourishment into the air before anyone even ate. You glance around and see people resting in quiet conversation, some half asleep beside the fire. The glow flickers gently across their faces, softening every expression. In this light, there are no sharp edges, no boundaries of age or role, only belonging. An unusual observation in one early missionary account describes how mothers would rock their babies beside the fire, not with songs, but with stories whispered about warmth itself. How the first woman coaxed heat from stone, how frost feared laughter, how sleep would always follow comfort. You realize these weren't just bedtime tales. They were survival lessons disguised as myth. Experts remain divided on the extent to which these shared spaces influenced later community housing designs. Some argue that longhouses inspired early colonial meeting halls. Others dismiss that idea as coincidence. But when you see the pattern of shared heat and conversation, it's hard not to draw parallels. Humanity always returns to the circle, to the flame, to the center. The elder's story trails off, and a comfortable silence settles over the room. Someone adjusts the fire, stirring the embers until sparks leap upward, glowing like orange snowflakes. The children giggle as they drift upward toward the smoke hole. You can feel the temperature rise slightly. just enough to ease the stiffness from your hands. Outside, night falls thick and blue. The snow reflects faint firelight from the roof vent, creating a halo around the structure. Inside, the hum of conversation continues, slower now, almost sleepy. You realize this warmth isn't just physical, it's emotional, the kind that seeps into bones and stays. When you step outside, the cold bites sharply at first, then fades as you recall the closeness behind you. The sound of laughter and crackling wood drifts into the open air. The stars are bright, unblinking, scattered across the black sky like sparks frozen mid-flight. For a moment, you imagine each one as another hearth, glowing somewhere far away. You take one deep breath, tasting wood smoke and snow. The realization settles quietly in your chest. Warmth is not just the gift of fire, but the miracle of togetherness. Alone, a single flame flickers. Shared, it becomes a Sunday. The world around you has grown quieter. You can almost feel the weight of the cold pressing against your skin. But now, you also notice how much the warmth inside you lingers. You have walked through snow houses, bark domes, and earth lodges. Yet what connects them is not only their ingenuity, it is their soul. Every shelter you have entered feels like a story. You follow the faint glow of a distant fire until it leads you to a small valley surrounded by pine. A single lodge stands there, its entrance marked with carved poles and painted hides. The figures on them shimmer faintly in the low light. Animals, swirling lines, and shapes of people holding hands beneath a sundae. You pause before stepping inside. The air carries the scent of sage and smoke, and the silence feels almost respectful. Inside, the fire burns low and steady. On the wall, symbols glow faintly with reflected light. An elder sits cross-legged before the flames, her eyes half closed. She does not speak at first, just listens to the wind moving through the smoke hole above. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft, worn like a river stone. She says that every home holds its own story, and every story holds the spirit of its home. According to oral traditions across the continent, the shapes and designs of shelters were never only functional. They embodied creation stories, clan identities, and cosmic patterns. The tipi echoed the sky, the longhouse mirrored the human spine, and the earth lodge represented the womb of the world. Even the smallest bark hut carried the pattern of its maker's life, each curve and seam tied to meaning. The architecture itself was language. One lesser-known curiosity from the Great Basin tells of a tribe that painted their lodge interiors each winter to retell the year's stories. They used charcoal, ochre, and berry dyes to mark births, hunts, storms, and dreams. When spring came, they let rain wash it all away, leaving a blank canvas for the next year. The cycle was both erasure and renewal, an architecture of memory. Scholars remain divided on how deeply these symbolic elements influenced construction decisions. Some view the designs as practical shapes, later imbued with meaning. Others argue the meaning came first, guiding every practical choice. As you sit before the fire, it feels impossible to separate the two. Belief and survival were simply two sides of the same warmth. It is well recorded in early ethnographic journals that even construction rituals were intertwined with myth. Before the first post was raised, a small offering might be buried beneath the floor, a bead, a feather, or a pinch of meal to invite good fortune. Some groups aligned their doorways toward the sunrise of the winter solstice, welcoming the returning sun as a guest. You imagine that morning, the first light spilling through the doorway, striking the hearth like a silent promise. The elder beside you stirs the fire, and sparks drift upward. She begins to chant softly, her words low and melodic, though you cannot understand them. She gestures toward the walls. The symbols flicker with movement in the firelight, circles within circles, a spiral representing both wind and breath. Her voice continues, explaining that warmth is not just fire, but the presence of story. A cold house, she says, is one that forgets its tales. You think about that as you watch the smoke rise. Every previous shelter you've seen, earth lodge, tipi, wigwam, igloo, was also a storybook written in materials. Even the angles of poles or the tilt of an entrance carried meaning. A tipi's smoke hole was not just ventilation, it was an eye to the heavens. The longhouse was a body where each beam was a rib, the hearths its heartbeat. To live inside such symbolism meant to remember your place in the universe every time you looked around. An early explorer once wrote that he entered a village where each lodge had painted symbols above the door, representing the family's guardian animal. Wolves guarded hunters, cranes watched over singers, and turtles watched healers. He noticed how people touched those symbols before entering, a gesture of greeting as though to an old friend. It may have looked like superstition to him, but to the people, it was simply conversation between home and heart. Experts continue to interpret these markings, often debating whether they were spiritual or social identifiers. Yet as you sit here in the glow, it feels less like debate and more like truth. The idea that a home could reflect identity is universal. These ancient homes simply did it with more honesty. A peculiar story from the plains tells of families who sang songs to their houses during storms. Each song was specific to that household, a melody that thanked the walls for standing strong. Elders said the walls remembered the sound and would hold firmer next time. You smile at the thought of a house strengthened by music, its beams humming faintly with the memory of human voices. The elder beside you stops her chant and looks at you. "The walls listen," she says quietly. "That is why we speak kindly to them." You nod, though words feel unnecessary. The room hums faintly, not from wind or sound, but from presence. You sense how generations have sat in this same glow, repeating the same gestures, each one layering meaning onto the space until it became alive. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, thick and soft. You watch the flakes melt as they touch the roof, steam rising into the night. The air smells of cedar, earth, and story. You realize that warmth has always been as much about belonging as about temperature. The house does not simply protect you from the cold, it reminds you that you have a place to return to. When you finally step outside, the carvings on the poles gleam in the faint moonlight. The valley feels hushed, reverent. The wind carries the last trace of cedar smoke and the soft echo of the elder's chant. You glance back at the lodge and understand what she meant. The warmth of a home is not only its fire, it is the memory of all who ever spoke within its walls. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you follow a winding path along a frozen river. The air feels brittle, yet alive, vibrating faintly with the hum of flowing water beneath the ice. In the distance, you see shapes of people working together, bending over logs, antler tools, and polished stones. Their movements are slow, careful, deliberate. The rhythmic tap of tool against wood echoes softly across the valley. You are walking into the world of builders, the ones who shaped warmth not only from nature, but from skill. As you draw near, you see their tools laid neatly on the ground. There are stone adzes with sharpened edges, bone awls, chisels made from copper, hammered thin and gleaming faintly under the pale Sunday. Each one is beautiful in its simplicity, designed for balance and precision. It is well established through archaeological discoveries that these tools were among the most advanced of their time. Builders used them not only to carve wood, but to shape meaning. You watch as one man steadies a thick log and begins to score its surface with a copper blade. The sound is soft and even. Each stroke carves a fine line of wood that curls away, falling like ribbons onto the snow. Another person kneels beside him, binding thin cords of sinew around the joints to test their flexibility. No words are exchanged, yet both seem to understand the rhythm perfectly. An unusual account from an early French explorer records that some native builders would test the sharpness of their blades by cutting through a strand of wet hide in a single motion. The sharper the blade, the more music it made, the faint singing sound of a perfect cut. They believed that sound revealed the tool's spirit, its readiness to work. You find the image charming, yet it feels entirely practical too. Sound tells you what the eye cannot see. Experts remain divided on how these tools were shared and traded across regions. Some evidence suggests wide networks of exchange where tribes traded copper, flint, and obsidian hundreds of miles from their origins. Others argue that certain tool designs emerged independently through necessity. Either way, the results were universal. Finely crafted implements that could turn trees into shelter, hides into warmth, and stone into survival. You kneel to examine a stone adze lying nearby. Its handle is smooth, darkened by years of touch. The head is bound tightly with sinew that has hardened into a gleaming band. You try to imagine the hours it took to grind this stone against another until it reached the right edge. The patience required humbles you. Every groove carries the mark of human persistence. It is recorded in multiple ethnographic studies that tool-making itself often carried ritual importance. Before beginning a large project, builders might fast or purify their hands in smoke. Some tribes of the northwest coast even named their favorite tools, speaking to them as companions. You can almost understand why. When your survival depends on a blade or a hammer, it stops being an object and becomes a friend. A curious piece of folklore from the Great Lakes region tells of a tool that refused to cut wood until its owner sang to it. The story might sound whimsical, but perhaps it's a way of saying that craftsmanship demands care, attention, and respect. You can almost picture it now, the craftsman humming softly, the rhythm matching the swing of his arm, the tool cutting true at last. Around you, the work continues. Women stretch hides near the fire, using bone needles to stitch seams that will cover the framework of a new lodge. Children fetch branches, learning which ones bend without breaking. Every person contributes something small, yet every motion builds toward the same purpose. The sound of their labor blends with the rustle of wind through reeds, turning the clearing into a quiet workshop of survival. Most researchers agree that this collective approach to building, where everyone participated according to skill and age, was one of the greatest strengths of native communities. Construction was never isolated work. It was an act of unity. Each swing of a blade, each knot tied in sinew, connected the builder not just to the structure, but to everyone who would later live within it. You watch a young boy testing a finished pole by pressing his shoulder against it. He grins as it bends slightly without cracking. His mother nods in approval. The satisfaction on his face tells you this is not merely a chore, but a lesson. Through this ritual of building, he learns patience, precision, and pride. It is fascinating to see how every element, material, tool, and touch fits into the cycle of warmth. The stone blades shape the wood becomes the frame becomes the shelter becomes the vessel for life. Nothing in this system is accidental. Everything exists in conversation with everything else. A lesser-known fact recorded by early traders describes how, in certain northern villages, people used heated tools not only to carve, but to seal joints. Metal and stone warmed in the fire could cauterize small gaps, preventing air from seeping through. The practice seems almost modern in its understanding of thermal transfer. You can picture the glow of a copper edge pressed gently into a seam, sealing heat inside both wall and memory. As twilight deepens, you sit beside the builders as they rest. The air smells of smoke, resin, and snow melting on hot metal. The glow of the fire reflects in their tools, tiny sparks of light against the dark. No one speaks for a while, and in the stillness, you realize that each of these tools carries not only physical purpose but ancestral knowledge. They are repositories of experience, passed hand to hand through generations. When the builders finally rise to continue, their movement seems slower now but sure. You stand as well, feeling the lingering warmth of their craft. Every shelter you have entered was born from this, the fusion of skill and intention, patience and flame. You walk away quietly, the faint ringing of metal still echoing in your ears, as if the tools themselves are singing their thanks into the cold air. The night has fallen softly over the valley. You follow the glow of small fires toward a cluster of rounded lodges that breathe smoke through their tops like quiet animals resting. As you draw nearer, You notice each roof has a small, deliberate hole at its peak, shaped and angled with precision. You can feel the gentle pull of air moving through them, invisible currents rising and falling in harmony with the flames below. The people who built these shelters were not only craftspeople, they were engineers of breath. You duck through one of the entrances and step into a space filled with warmth. A single fire burns at the center, and the air inside feels balanced, not too smoky, not too cool. You look upward and see the open vent at the top, perfectly placed to let smoke out while keeping the heat below. The design is both simple and miraculous. You can see how it keeps the rhythm of the home alive, just as lungs keep the body steady. It is widely recognized among historians that many indigenous builders understood natural convection intuitively. They positioned smoke holes to work with prevailing winds rather than against them. By placing them slightly off-center or shielding them with hides, they could fine-tune airflow without losing warmth. No blueprints, no measuring tools, just deep familiarity with how air behaves. A lesser-known account written by a fur trader describes how, during a storm, he watched a woman adjust her lodge's vent by hand. She moved 2 poles from outside, narrowing the opening until the smoke flowed perfectly again. The trader noted that she altered the wind with nothing but a stick and instinct. You imagine her standing in the snow, feeling the air like a musician tuning an instrument. Anthropologists have long discussed whether these openings were purely functional or also ceremonial. Many tribal stories describe smoke holes as eyes to the sky, points where prayers rose along with the smoke. Some longhouses were aligned so that moonlight could shine directly through the vent on certain nights. The coincidence of practicality and spirituality was never accidental. Fire, air, and spirit shared the same path upward. You settle onto a mat near the hearth. The smoke curls lazily above the flames, rising like a soft ribbon before vanishing through the hole. The smell of sweetgrass fills the air. Someone has added a bundle of it to the coals, scenting the room with calm. The warmth feels layered fire below, air above, smoke between each part in balance with the others. It's no wonder that early observers called these dwellings machines of comfort, though the builders themselves would have laughed at the word. To them, it was simply knowing how to live. A curious note in an explorer's journal mentions that children were often taught to read smoke like weather. If the smoke rose straight, they said the spirits were pleased, and the day would be calm. If it wavered or flattened, snow or wind was coming. You can see a child now, squinting into the draught, learning the art of reading the invisible. Knowledge passed not through words, but through observation. It is well documented that some Arctic and subarctic homes used vents designed from bone rings or reinforced with clay, preventing collapse during heavy storms. Others built sliding covers that could be adjusted with sticks from below, a feature astonishingly similar to modern ventilation systems. Every tribe adapted the idea to their own environment, refining it again and again until it became perfect. Experts remain divided on whether these designs influenced later colonial architecture. Some architects argue that early settler cabins borrowed venting techniques from nearby native homes, while others think the similarity was coincidence. What is undeniable is that indigenous builders had already solved the problem of smoke long before chimneys appeared on foreign shores. You watch as the firelight flickers against the roof, the smoke drawing faint shapes that twist and shimmer. The hole above seems alive, a small eye watching the sky. For a moment, the stars are visible through it, cold, distant, steady. It feels like a conversation between two worlds, the one above, infinite and freezing, and the one below, small but warm and alive. A curious oral story from the plateau region says that when smoke rose cleanly through the vent, it carried good dreams with it. Families believed that sleeping beneath a steady draft ensured a peaceful night. When the vent became clogged with snow, someone would climb outside to reopen it, no matter how cold, saying, "We must give the dreams a way out." You smile at the image of that small act of devotion amid the blizzard. The engineer in you admires the precision of airflow. The dreamer in you understands its poetry. These smoke holes were not just technical marvels, but symbols of trust in balance. Too open, and warmth escaped. Too closed, and the air soured. Life, too, depended on that same delicate equilibrium. The fire crackles, throwing shadows up the walls. You can feel the faint draft against your face, the quiet conversation between flame and sky continuing above you. You think about how this design, so small, so perfect, represents a profound understanding of both physics and faith. To live through winter required mastery of air, but also belief in the unseen forces that move through it. When you finally stand to leave, you glance upward once more. Through the vent, a single star winks at you, framed by the faint drift of smoke. It feels like a farewell, or perhaps an invitation. You step outside into the still night, the smoke rising behind you, warm breath vanishing into the cold heavens. Morning arrives quietly, the world washed in grey light. You walk through a narrow forest path where the ground is frozen hard, your steps echoing softly against the roots. The air smells faintly of pine and something sharper, like resin or pitch. You follow the scent until you reach a clearing where several people are gathered around a shallow pit. They are heating a dark, sticky substance in a pot set above a fire. Steam rises in curls, carrying a scent that is both earthy and sweet. The builders here are teaching you one of their most important secrets: how to keep the cold and wet from ever finding its way inside. The thick black liquid they are stirring is pitch, drawn from pine and spruce trees, mixed with crushed charcoal, animal fat, and sometimes even ash. It becomes a waterproof sealant strong enough to resist rain, wind, and snow. It's well established in ethnographic records that native builders across many regions used pitch, clay, and animal fat to coat walls, roofs, and seams. When applied correctly, it hardened into a flexible armor that kept moisture out while letting the structure breathe. A curious report from a fur trader's journal describes seeing a family seal their lodge after the first snowfall. They heated pitch until it bubbled, then used flat pieces of bark as brushes to spread it along the seams of the roof. The trader said that even after 2 days of sleet, the inside remained perfectly dry. He compared it to the skin of a living thing that heals itself each season. You can almost see it now, glistening in the firelight as steam rises, the smell filling the air with a kind of sticky comfort. Some archaeologists still debate the origin of this sealing technique. Was it learned from observation of animals like beavers and muskrats, who line their homes with mud and oil? Or was it an independent discovery born from long winters of trial and error? The evidence points to both. People have always watched the world closely, learning from the smallest movements of nature. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a clay pit. She shapes wet clay into a ball and rolls it in ashes, then packs it into a crack between logs. The material hardens almost instantly, forming a smooth, pale seam. She presses her palm against it gently, as if listening for leaks. The process feels as delicate as it is strong. You can imagine how entire families took part in sealing their homes, each touch ensuring the next storm stayed outside where it belonged. It is well documented that waterproofing was a year-round task, not a one-time event. Each spring, as snow melted, families repaired any cracks or weak points with new layers of pitch or clay. In the far north, some used animal fat rubbed directly onto hide coverings, a technique that made the material both waterproof and flexible. The smell may have been strong, but it kept cold air from seeping through even the smallest holes. A lesser-known curiosity from coastal communities tells that builders sometimes added crushed shells or sand to their mixtures, creating a glimmering finish that reflected light like frost. It gave homes a faint shimmer under moonlight, making entire villages look like clusters of stars fallen to the earth. Function met beauty again, effortlessly. Experts remain divided on whether the sealing mixtures were passed between tribes through trade or discovered independently in different environments. Some believe the practice spread along trade routes where resin and animal oils were exchanged for furs and hides. Others think every region simply found its own version of the same truth. Warmth depends as much on the smallest cracks as on the largest walls. You crouch beside one of the builders and watch her stir the pot. The pitch thickens into a dark syrup, bubbling softly. When she lifts a stick from the mixture, it glistens in the dim light, stretching like molten glass. She smiles, testing its readiness by letting a drop fall into snow. It hardens instantly into a smooth bead. She picks it up and places it in your hand. It is warm, firm, and smells like forest fire and honey. The builder explains through gesture that this hardened pitch can be stored and reheated later, a portable repair kit carried between camps. You imagine how valuable that would be during a sudden storm, a small lump of security tucked into a pouch. In one corner of the clearing, two men smear clay over the outer walls of a lodge. The motion is steady, their hands moving in rhythm as if they're painting. The walls, now coated and glistening, look solid, invulnerable. When the firelight hits, they shine with the dull luster of polished stone. Inside, warmth will stay where it belongs. Historical accounts reveal that certain tribes used a mix of crushed charcoal and bear fat to darken their coatings. The result absorbed more sunlight during the day, increasing interior warmth without the builders ever naming it as solar gain. They simply noticed what worked and repeated it. A curious piece of oral history tells of a winter so harsh that the clay froze solid before families could seal their roofs. To fix it, they mixed hot broth into the clay to keep it pliable. When finished, they joked that their homes smelled like soup and safety. The phrase lingered for generations. You watch as the work winds down. The pot of pitch is nearly empty, the fire dimming. The builders stretch their arms, satisfied. Around them, the newly sealed lodges gleam in the pale light. The air smells faintly of pine, smoke, and effort. The valley feels protected, as if wrapped in invisible skin. Experts often write about grand achievements, monuments, temples, and cities, but here, greatness hides in small acts. The sealing of a seam, the smoothing of clay, the care taken to prevent a single drop of cold from entering. This is architecture as empathy, built one brushstroke at a time. As night falls, you step closer to one of the finished lodges. You press your palm to its surface. It is smooth, cool, and solid. Inside you hear faint laughter and the murmur of voices. Not even the wind dares to interrupt. The smell of resin lingers in the air like a quiet promise. The warmth will hold. The landscape opens wide again, the trees thinning until they disappear into open plains. The air is sharper here, and the sky feels impossibly large. You can almost sense how nomads once moved across this expanse, following the rhythm of herds and seasons. The horizon seems endless, yet the people who lived here knew every rise, every stream, every whisper of wind. They carried not just tools or hides, but knowledge how to build warmth wherever the day ended. You see the faint outline of a campsite ahead. Smoke drifts gently upward from several small fires, each surrounded by conical frames of poles. The tipis are partly open, their hides rolled to let out the last of the day's heat. Children run between them, their laughter swallowed by the vast sky. You approach slowly, imagining the cycle of packing and building that defined this life. Nothing was wasted, not even effort. Everything was designed for movement. It is well documented that nomadic tribes of the Great Plains and beyond developed an intricate rhythm for seasonal travel. They followed herds of buffalo and elk, their lives woven into the migrations of the animals. Homes had to be portable, lightweight, and quick to assemble. The tipi became the perfect answer, a structure that could withstand the fiercest blizzard, then vanish without a trace when the grass grew green again. A curious note in the journals of an early trader describes how he watched an entire camp pack up within an hour. The women worked in practiced silence, folding hides, wrapping poles, and securing everything onto travois dragged by dogs. The trader wrote that he could not believe how something that seemed so permanent could dissolve so effortlessly. Yet when night fell, Smoke from new fires rose just a few miles away, proof that the same homes had simply moved, carrying warmth with them, like an ember passed between breaths. Some anthropologists continue to debate how such efficiency was achieved. Was it purely practical design, or did it come from a deeper philosophy of impermanence? Perhaps both. When you live in motion, you learn that security is not in walls but in the ability to rebuild them anywhere. You sit by one of the fires, watching a woman unroll a hide covering. She brushes away snow before tying it around the pole frame. Her motions are precise but gentle, like someone folding a favorite blanket. Every tie and seam seems to follow memory rather than thought. A man nearby bundles rope and straightens poles, his hands moving with the same quiet fluency. This is a dance repeated for generations, a choreography of survival. It is noted in historical accounts that these camps moved in response to both weather and food sources. Some traveled hundreds of miles in a year, returning to familiar river valleys when winter came. Each site held the memory of fires from seasons past. Even when the snow erased the footprints, the earth remembered. A lesser-known curiosity recorded by an observer in the 1,850 seconds claims that before leaving a campsite, elders would scatter ashes from the hearths across the snow. They said it was to thank the ground for keeping us warm. Perhaps it was ritual, or perhaps a quiet gesture of gratitude. You imagine them standing at dawn, casting handfuls of ash that vanished into the wind like whispered farewells. Nomadic shelters had to balance lightness with resilience. The poles were often made from slender lodgepole pine, carefully stripped and seasoned to prevent cracking. Each family carried its own set, bundled in groups of 12 or more. The hides, usually from bison, were smoked for flexibility and treated with animal fat to resist moisture. Together, they formed a structure that breathed with the wind rather than fought against it. Experts remain divided on how far this portability extended. Some argue that entire winter camps were relocated multiple times per season. Others believe that families built more durable versions of their teepees when deep snow arrived. The truth likely shifted with the weather. Adaptation was constant. You notice how every object around the camp serves more than one purpose. The same pole that holds up a tipi might become part of a drying rack tomorrow. The same hide used for walls could serve as a blanket or sled covering. Mobility demanded versatility. It's a lesson that feels timeless, even modern. An unusual anecdote from a Métis trader tells of a storm so fierce that an entire camp had to move during the night. Instead of disassembling everything, they tied the hides tighter, dropped the poles, and dragged the shelters whole for a short distance until they reached safer ground. He described the glowing fires moving slowly across the plain, like stars being carried through the storm. You can almost see that image now, warmth in motion, refusing to die. It is fascinating how these travelers understood both endurance and release. To stay alive in this vastness meant knowing when to hold fast and when to let go. Nothing they built was meant to last forever, yet everything they built carried permanence of spirit. The warmth of one fire was carried to the next, the same flame reborn again and again. As twilight settles, the camp begins to quiet. The hides rustle gently in the wind, the fires dim to low glows. You can hear distant laughter, a song carried faintly across the open air. The people here are not fighting the cold, they are simply living with it, flowing through the season like the herds they follow. When you stand to leave, a gust of wind brushes your face. The cold is sharp, but behind it, you feel the echo of those moving fires, those travelling homes. The lesson lingers with you. Warmth need not be tied to a place. It can be carried, folded, shared. The world itself becomes a shelter if you learn to move with it. The plains fade behind you as you move westward, where the land begins to climb and break into ridges and stone plateaus. The wind changes here. It smells of dust and sagebrush, dry but clean. The snow lingers only in the shadows, while the sun bounces off cliffs in blinding sheets of gold. Ahead, you see homes that do not move at all. Their walls rise straight from the rock, solid and silent. as if the mountains themselves decided to shelter their people. These are the houses of permanence, built to withstand not just one winter, but centuries of them. You approach a Pueblo village perched against a cliff. The walls are sun-baked, their color blending so perfectly with the canyon that from a distance you might mistake the homes for the land itself. A narrow path leads upward, winding between tiers of stacked dwellings. Each level is reached by ladders made of peeled logs, their rungs smoothed by countless hands. Smoke trails drift lazily from small openings in the roofs. The air hums faintly with the echo of voices. It is well documented that the ancestral Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and their predecessors, built these adobe and stone homes to endure the extremes of desert life. Their design worked equally well against summer heat and winter cold. Thick walls of clay, sand, straw, and stone acted as both insulation and storage for warmth. During the day, the walls absorbed sunlight. At night, they released it slowly, turning the entire structure into a living thermal battery. A curious account written by a Spanish chronicler in the 1500s notes his astonishment at entering such a home on a cold morning. He expected to find freezing air, but instead felt steady warmth. The fire inside was small, almost ceremonial, yet the thick adobe held heat so well that the room felt like a cocoon. He wrote, "The walls breathe heat as if alive." You imagine his surprise, and the quiet satisfaction of those who had mastered such balance long before he arrived. Some archaeologists continue to debate whether these techniques were discovered through experimentation or inherited knowledge from even older desert cultures. The patterns carved into ancient ruins suggest an understanding of airflow and heat retention that was both scientific and symbolic. Even the placement of homes along canyon walls was deliberate. South-facing walls captured the low winter sun, while overhanging cliffs shielded them from icy winds. You step through a doorway barely taller than your shoulders. Inside, the air smells of earth, wood smoke, and roasted corn. The ceiling is low, made of wooden beams blackened with soot. A small fire pit glows at the center, surrounded by smooth stones. The warmth radiates evenly, soft and deep. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the texture of clay rough, layered, alive with the fingerprints of its makers. A lesser-known curiosity from oral tradition tells that the clay used for these homes was mixed with the dust of ancestral ruins, binding the present to the past. Builders said that using old earth invited the wisdom of those who came before. Whether literal or poetic, the act ensured continuity. Each new wall carried traces of forgotten hands. It is well established that the pueblos were not only homes but social maps. Families lived in clusters connected by shared courtyards, storage rooms, and ceremonial chambers called kivas. In winter, the kivas became sanctuaries of both warmth and spirit. Fires burned low in their centers while stories rose toward the roof vents in spirals of smoke. Within those chambers, people spoke to their ancestors and to the sun itself, waiting for its return after the long night of winter. An unusual observation made by a 19th century anthropologist records how families placed smooth stones near their hearths each evening, warming them before sliding them under sleeping mats. Children would cradle these night stones in their blankets, waking to find them still faintly warm. You picture the quiet joy of that ritual, the small miracle of comfort crafted from patience and ingenuity. Experts remain divided on whether the Pueblo design influenced early frontier settlements that later dotted the southwest. Some believe the compact layout and thick adobe walls directly inspired colonial architecture. Others argue that settlers merely adapted to the same climate challenges. Regardless of influence, the Pueblos stood as lessons in permanence, a harmony between human need and desert rhythm. Outside, the light fades slowly across the cliffs. Shadows stretch like cool fingers across the walls, and fires begin to bloom behind small doorways. The entire village seems to exhale together, glowing softly under the early stars. You can hear faint singing, a low hum that rises and falls with the wind. A curious local tale tells of a winter when the sun did not appear for many days. The people, fearing it had abandoned them, built fires on every rooftop to guide it home. When dawn finally came, the cliffs shone so brightly that the snow melted in hours. Since then, families light small rooftop fires each solstice, not to beg the sun but to greet it. You look up and see smoke lifting into the cool air like prayer, graceful and quiet. The permanence of these homes contrasts sharply with the tipis and lodges you saw before, yet the purpose remains the same: warmth, safety, belonging. Each design answers the same question differently, shaped by the land beneath it. These people chose endurance over movement, patience over chase. Their warmth came not from mobility but from rootedness. When you step outside again, the cold night wraps around you. The adobe walls glow faintly in the starlight, holding the heat of the day within their hearts. You touch one wall gently, feeling that stored warmth beneath the surface. The people here do not fight winter. They absorb it, turn it into memory, and release it back as comfort. You descend the ladder slowly, each rung polished by centuries of hands. The air cools as you reach the ground, but behind you, the homes continue to shimmer with gentle light. You take one last look at the village, the cliff rising behind it like a guardian. Even the cold cannot enter without permission. The world quiets as dawn stretches across the mesas. Pale light spills over snow-dusted grass and frozen streams, and you find yourself drawn toward a ring of low shelters where smoke drifts lazily through still air. It is morning in a small winter camp, and the day begins not with words, but with warmth shared among those who have survived another long night. You walk closer. Inside one of the lodges, a fire glows low in the center, surrounded by figures sitting close together. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasted corn, and fur warmed by skin. A small child sleeps beside an older woman who occasionally stirs the fire with a stick, coaxing the embers back to life. Two men sit opposite her, mending tools, their breath slow and even. The rhythm of living together feels as familiar as heartbeat. It is well documented in ethnographic accounts that native winter shelters were not divided randomly. The placement of each person reflected an unspoken map of care and respect. Elders, infants, and those in poor health slept closest to the hearth, where the heat gathered most intensely. Young adults, responsible for maintaining the fire and defending the camp, took the cooler positions near the entrance. The pattern was both practical and symbolic, a constant reminder that survival was a shared duty. A curious note from an early missionary describes the subtle etiquette that governed these arrangements. Fire was never crossed lightly. One always moved around it, never over it, for that space was sacred. Even within the smallest lodge, the invisible lines of warmth-shaped behavior, defining order without need for rules. Modern researchers continue to discuss whether these seating customs were rooted in spiritual belief or efficiency. The evidence suggests both. Fire served as the axis of community, a physical center and a moral one. Children learned early that the hearth was not merely a tool, but a presence deserving respect. Its warmth symbolized unity, its light honesty, and its smoke remembrance. You sit by the fire and feel its calm pulse against your skin. The elder beside you smiles faintly before turning back to her work. She is threading sinew through the edge of a hide, her movements steady despite the tremor in her hands. The child beside her shifts in sleep, murmuring softly, and she adjusts the fur blanket to cover him completely. The gesture is small, but it holds centuries of wisdom. Warmth, after all, is a language older than words. It is widely known that within communal shelters, fire maintenance was often the task of younger members. They learned how to read the flame as one reads a story, when to feed it, when to let it rest, how to tell from its sound whether the wood was too green or too dry. Keeping the fire alive was more than a chore. It was an initiation into the rhythm of responsibility. A lesser-known curiosity recorded in oral stories tells that during bitter storms, families believed the fire could grow lonely if no one spoke near it. So even in exhaustion, Someone would whisper to the coals, stories, jokes, prayers to remind it that it was not alone. The idea may sound whimsical, yet you can feel the truth of it now, in this quiet warmth where silence feels almost alive. Around you, life unfolds in gentle repetition. Someone shakes snow from a hide hung by the entrance. Another fills a pot with snow to melt for water. The fire hums steadily, neither rushed nor weak. Every movement balances energy, preserving heat for the long day ahead. Most historians agree that these social arrangements served not only survival but mental peace. Winter confinement could last months, yet shared routines kept anxiety from taking root. Families played games, told stories, and worked by the firelight, the day's tasks blurring with the rituals of affection. The pattern created harmony inside even when chaos ruled outside. An unusual description from a 19th century observer recounts how, during freezing nights, several families sometimes joined their shelters together, removing walls between them to share heat and companionship. The observer called it a great heart of fire beating within many ribs. You can almost see it now, rows of people sleeping side by side, the fire's light weaving them into a single breathing organism. Experts remain divided on whether this closeness was purely necessity or part of a conscious philosophy of unity. Whatever the reason, the result was unmistakable. Warmth multiplied when shared. The elders often said that the fire gave back what you gave it. If you tended it selfishly, it smoked and stung your eyes. If you cared for it gently, it burned clean and bright. The same could be said for human bonds. You look around the room once more. The elder has begun humming softly, a tune that rises and falls like wind through reeds. Her voice blends with the crackle of the fire and the faint breathing of those around you. The melody carries no words, but it fills the air with quiet reassurance. A curious field note written by an ethnographer mentions that songs like this were believed to smooth the air, ensuring that heat flowed evenly through the space. Whether poetic or practical, you can feel the difference. The lodge seems to breathe with the song, each note dissolving into warmth. Outside, the wind stirs the snow into swirling shapes, but it cannot touch what is inside. You watch the fire for a long time, mesmerized by its steady rhythm. The coals pulse red, the flames lean and sway as if bowing to the song. The child sighs in his sleep, the elder smiles, and for a moment, the entire world feels balanced. When you finally stand to leave, you step carefully around the fire, following the unspoken rule of respect. The elder nods once without looking up. You bow your head slightly in return, then step outside. The cold air hits your face like a whisper, not an attack. Behind you, the murmur of life continues, a chorus of breath, warmth, and care woven together into something stronger than the storm. The wind has softened into a steady sigh that moves through the trees like a slow song. You follow its sound until you reach the edge of another camp. The scent of fresh earth and pine needles mixes with the faint perfume of smoke. Here, people are gathered not to build new shelters, but to tend the ones already standing. Repair, not construction, defines this day. The air carries an energy of devotion, the kind that comes from mending something you love. You pause to watch as several men and women work along the side of a lodge. They are replacing bark panels loosened by snow and patching seams with new moss and resin. Children collect small twigs, tossing them into baskets while the elders hum softly nearby. The mood feels ritualistic, peaceful. This is not frantic labor to fight the cold. It is ceremony, a conversation between generations and the homes that have protected them. It is well established through ethnographic records that maintenance was a seasonal duty rooted in gratitude. The first repairs after winter storms were often accompanied by blessings. People would sprinkle tobacco or grain at the base of each wall before sealing it again, thanking the materials for their strength. This practice turned repair into renewal. A well-kept shelter was not merely proof of skill, it was evidence of respect. A lesser-known curiosity from the plains tells of families marking the end of each winter by repainting or rewrapping parts of their lodges. They believed that the old coverings had absorbed all the hardship of the cold season and needed to be replaced to cleanse the spirit of the home. Sometimes they burned the worn hides in small fires outside the village, letting the smoke drift upward as an offering. You can almost see the trails of grey rising into the morning sky, carrying both memory and release. Some researchers continue to debate whether such ceremonies were strictly symbolic or served practical community functions. They certainly did both. Ritual made the work meaningful, but the work itself kept the homes alive. Repairs ensured insulation stayed tight, smoke holes stayed open, and wooden frames remained sturdy. These actions guaranteed survival, yet the prayers and songs that accompanied them guaranteed harmony. You crouch near a woman repairing a tear in a hide covering. Her fingers move deftly, threading sinew through the leather with a bone needle. The hide creaks softly as she pulls it tight, the motion both tender and strong. She glances up briefly and smiles before returning to her task. It occurs to you that every stitch in this shelter was likely sewn by hand in just this way, each one holding not only material together, but generations of memory. It is well documented that in many communities, the act of patching a roof or tightening poles was led by elders who passed down the knowledge verbally. They instructed by story rather than command. If the wind whistles, it means the wall misses you, one elder might say, meaning it needs reinforcement. The sayings were both poetic and instructional, transforming practical wisdom into living language. An unusual field note from the early 1900s describes a festival among northern forest tribes marking the renewal of the lodge. After a long winter, families gathered to recover the frames with fresh bark and hide. Songs were sung, fires relit, and food shared. The anthropologist who witnessed it wrote that the joy seemed less about the new coverings and more about the collective act itself, proof that the village had endured another year. You watch the camp around you and realize how natural this rhythm feels. The sound of scraping bark, the soft brush of moss being pressed into cracks, the faint laughter that rises when someone's resin-stained hands stick together. Maintenance becomes music. Even the children contribute, passing twine or fetching water. Experts remain divided on whether these traditions qualify as formal architecture or something beyond it. What you see before you is not architecture in the modern sense, but something far more intimate. It is a living relationship between people and their shelters. Homes are not static objects. They breathe, they age, and they are tended like kin. A curious story told by an elder on the Pacific coast speaks of a lodge that sang during high winds. The people believed the sound was the spirit of the structure reminding them to check its bindings. When they tightened the ropes, the singing stopped, and all was well. The tale captures a simple truth. The builders saw no separation between themselves and what they built. The house listened, and they listened back. You step inside one of the lodges that has just been repaired. The air smells of pine resin and damp clay freshly sealed. The walls gleam faintly where new bark has been fitted. The fire in the center burns cleanly now, its smoke rising straight and sure. You can feel the difference, the air warmer, steadier, more alive. It is remarkable how care transforms space. A shelter freshly tended feels more than secure. It feels loved. Perhaps that is why these structures lasted generations despite storms and time. They were not abandoned to decay. They were nurtured as part of the family. Outside, as dusk begins to gather, the workers rest. Someone hands around a pot of warm stew, and laughter ripples through the group. The day's labor has ended, but the ceremony remains. Smoke rises through the trees, curling upward as if to carry thanks into the darkening sky. You sit quietly at the edge of the clearing, the smell of resin still heavy in the air. The homes stand renewed, the people content. You realize that warmth is not only preserved through walls and fires, but through continuity, through the care that passes from one pair of hands to another. These shelters survive because love itself is part of their design. The sound of the wind changes as you climb toward a low ridge. It no longer howls, It hums softly, like water moving through hollow reeds. You follow the noise and soon catch the faint smell of roasted corn and wood smoke. Below, a cluster of lodges forms a small village tucked against the slope. Smoke rises in thin ribbons, and the air vibrates with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Inside these homes, warmth is not only a comfort but a companion to the food that sustains it. You enter the largest lodge near the center. The inside glows with golden light. The fire pit has been widened, its edges lined with smooth stones that radiate heat. Beside it sits a woman stirring something thick in a clay pot. The smell is intoxicating, a mixture of roasted grain and herbs. Around her, baskets of dried berries, roots and smoked meat are stacked carefully, their colours muted in the flicker of firelight. The link between food and heat here feels inseparable. It is well established in historical studies that winter survival depended on meticulous planning. Long before the first frost, families stored dried corn, squash, beans and meat in underground pits. The design of these storage spaces was remarkable. Narrow openings to keep out cold air, deep bellies insulated by earth. When the snow came, the food itself became part of the home's warmth. Each meal released not just nourishment but steam and energy, softening the air within. A curious note from a 17th century Jesuit missionary describes how he watched women drop heated stones into pots of water to cook stews. He wrote that the sound, soft bubbling, punctuated by the hiss of steam, reminded him of the earth's breath beneath the snow. What he didn't realize was that this technique saved wood. Instead of burning large fires, people transferred stored heat from stones directly into their meals, conserving fuel for the coldest nights. Experts continue to discuss whether this method originated independently in multiple regions or spread through contact between neighboring peoples. Regardless, it shows the same intelligence visible in every other detail of native architecture. Energy was never wasted. Every spark, every ember, every wisp of smoke had a purpose. You sit down beside the hearth and watch as the woman ladles stew into small bowls made from polished wood. The steam rises and fills the air with the scent of herbs and